Hello everyone, this is the Spider Fanboy here to bring you a new What If series. I know I haven't finished my other two, but don't worry, I'm not going to be abandoning those. They'll be continued next week. Well, the week that this will go up. I finished my recordings for this week. This may go up over the weekend, I'm not entirely sure. Depends how I feel. But this new series we're going to be starting is based in My Hero Academia. And it's what if Deku developed his full cowl early. So, to start with this, we're going to start around the time during his 10 months of training where Izuku ended up collapsing due to his overwork. And in order to help rectify the situation and to give young Midoriya something to do, All Might actually gives him a bit of an assignment. He wants him to use his quirk analysis to come up with some ideas and theories as to how he's going to be using One for All himself. And when Deku just answers, oh, he'll use it just like All Might, he'll ask him, well, how do you think I use it? And while All Might does end up giving a brief explanation about how he uses it to empower every muscle and every part of his body all at once, he clarifies that the previous users of One for All actually used it to more enhance their own quirks than they did to enhance their bodies. Not that they didn't, but it was more of a side effect. The enhancement of their body was more of a side effect due to the fact that it wasn't as powerful as it was when he ended up receiving it and when he ended up cultivating it. He was the one to bring out the true physical might aspect of enhancement of One for All. So he ends up telling young Midoriya to go ahead and take a look at himself and how he would end up using the power of One for All. What kind of fighting style would he have to develop? How would he move around a battlefield? And he tells him that he's more than willing to give him a few pointers in how to throw a proper punch, basic form, how it is you're going to want to move, and even throwing how to throw out a basic kick. He had to learn plenty of things in order to help regulate his power, and the only reason he doesn't regularly use kicks himself is due to the fact that, well, a normal punch is enough, but legs are the strongest point, are they hold the strongest collection of muscles in the entire human body. If his normal punches are enough to send out shockwaves, he asked him what did he think would happen if he were to send out a regular kick, even if he were to depower it to the same percentage as what he uses for punches. It'd be much more devastating. But he tells him that he's going to have to start small from the beginning due to the fact that he's obviously not as in shape. So he's going to have to start small, and kicks would definitely be a good trump card for him. So he gives him a few basic pointers alongside the normal training going forward in how to properly throw a punch, how to throw kicks, blocking and guarding. He trains him a little bit, gives him a few sparring tips, just in his normal form, in his skinny form, which is still surprisingly physically capable, despite how he looks. And he definitely tells him that appearances aren't everything, despite what his status as number one may lead you to believe. He definitely knows how to actually fight. It's just that if he were to use such techniques with his level of power, he'd cause a lot of devastation and unnecessary damage to his surroundings and to his opponents. He only uses that if he really needs to. But he does tell, Midoriya, since he's going to be starting smaller, he's definitely going to need such techniques, and to take a look at other heroes, get some inspiration from places outside of himself. And Midoriya does do that. He takes a look at what footage there is of Eraserhead, because he was aware of him, so maybe he looks more into him. How he moves across rooftops in the city nights, kind of like some Batman stuff. How he uses leverage, how he swings around. Sorry, takes advantage of like things like how he is able to move across rooftops and how he's able to do parkour. He takes notes of his movements, of how he's jumping across these places and how he's able to dance around his opponents. He looks at Mirko and how she specifically uses her fighting style, completely revolved around her legs and her kick-based martial arts. The Ingenium family, who are known for their engine-based quirks, the current Ingenium specifically, and how he uses it in his arms, and yet is still able to increase his speed. And he's gonna be practicing on his own basic stances and all that kind of stuff. And maybe he looks into some meditation techniques. since he's talking a little bit more with All Might about One for All, maybe he opens up, tells him how he himself was once quirkless, and that's why he doesn't really have a quirk to enhance. But he tells him that it's a type of like after some explaining, they're both pretty crap at putting things into words. But he eventually is able to get across that it's a stockpile of actual energy, and that it's something he has to move around. At first, it definitely felt a little foreign, but he was quick to get a grasp on it. It came naturally to him, but he does tell him that it's like eventually it'll settle into just another thing that he does as easily as breathing. That he has to let it flow naturally throughout the entirety of his body. He can't try to contain it into just one limb, which Izuku does end up asking him. He's like, well, you may have moments where you want to specifically charge up one limb for like one specific attack. Maybe you want to deliver a specifically powerful punch or a very particularly devastating kick. You never know. Maybe you might even want to use these fingers. If you think the shockwaves from my punches or something, you should see what I can do with my fingers. Little innuendo. But no, he does make it clear that it's a devastating kind of power, and it's not something he should treat lightly. It's something he's gonna have to allow it to happen. So eventually we get to the day of the entrance exams, and when after taking in the hair, maybe he gets it done the day before, just due to this little bit of extra training. He ends up finishing the beach the day before. Either way, the morning of, as he's heading towards UA, like as he's walking there, he's doing breathing exercises and trying to find that spark of energy. And let's say somewhere on the beach or somewhere on the train he's able to find it. And as he gets off the train and walks closer to UA, he's like letting the energy flow through him. He briefly lets it flow through him. Like he finds a little alley to stop by for a minute. He lets it flow through him and nearly overwhelms him, but he lets it settle. And like as he's walking, he resumes his walk towards school. He's doing his breathing exercises, and he's letting the smallest amounts of One for All flow throughout his body. All Might told him he'd probably be able to handle around 5%, but just in case, to start with something a little lower, to kind of visualize it as a knob that he's turning up, and to keep it a little lower what he thinks his body can handle, just to kind of get a feel for it before he gets into the combat section of the entrance exam. And as he's going through his written exam, he eventually finishes. He's continuing his breathing exercises, and he's able to keep it to what he estimates is about 2 to 3%. Small, extremely small. Doesn't create any real light show. Maybe his skin brightens a little, but no one really notices it. Or if they do, they just think it's some kind of passive effect of his quirk, since they see him taking obvious breathing, deep breaths, and calming himself. They think it might just be some kind of passive effect of his quirk that's pretty negligible, and that's even if it shows. Like I said, he's keeping it very low, so there's not even going to be the lighting up of his skin. Eventually, they get ready to. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, just had to help someone real quick. But yeah, he gets to the entrance exams, and let's say while he was doing his meditation, he still had that interaction with Uraraka. He was a little too preoccupied with his breathing techniques, closing his eyes. So he still had that trip and fall. Uraraka still helped him out. So here he's actually able to muster up the courage to talk to her. He's been able to settle his nerves with all this breathing. And he talks to her for a minute before Ida ends up interrupting. And here Uraraka actually steps in and clarifies that they were just talking. They encountered each other earlier, but then they all get cut off. And it ends up breaking his concentration over One for All. And, Mike tells him to go on ahead and get ready. And they all charge in. Zuko falls behind for a brief second just to power back up. And this time he really pushes it. And he's able to reach 5%. And he feels like, ooh, yeah, that's definitely his limit. And he rushes in. His movements are a little stiff, but as he continues to fight against, let's say he initially goes up against some one-pointers and he's able to tear through them pretty easily. So he actually decides to dial it back to conserve some stamina. As excited as he is, maybe he maybe gets a little too overeager. He's fighting to get some 1 and 2 pointers, but he eventually decides to dial it back. He keeps it around 2 to 3% against the 1 and 2 pointers. It's a little more difficult for the 2 pointers, but he's able to use some of the debris, kind of like how he did in the sports festival. He's holding a piece and he's able to cut through them. And he ups it up to 5% whenever he's against some 3 pointers. And he's getting a decent amount of points. If I'm correct, Uraraka ended up getting around 28 points. So we'll say Deku gets around 24. He still has to take breaks in between his fighting of groups of the robots because he's still not. This is still his first day of using the quirk. So he's gonna have to take like a minute or two breather in between each little battle, where he steps away to regain his breath and power down so that he doesn't stress his body too much. But eventually he gets to a point where he can constantly keep it at like 2 to 3% and jumping up to 5. But eventually the scene with the 0 pointer still happens, and here Deku does still get he still impulsively acts. He jumps up to 100% and smashes the 0 pointer when he sees it's about to squash Uraraka. He was about to zip away with 5%, but when he's powered up, all of his senses are increased. So he was able to pick her up. He was able to pick up her. He was still able to hear her, even if he did get a little farther away. And he ends up zooming back, jumps up to 100%, and takes down the 0 pointer. And yeah, sometimes that nature can still completely bypass all forms of sense. But yeah, he does take down the 0 pointer, just the same as in canon. And then we get to around what is about a week, probably, just to wait for the results for being accepted into UA. I have a timeline here made on Reddit. It might not be the most accurate thing, but it's definitely better than what most would have. And it makes sense, there'd probably be like a week wait between between the entrance exam and then being accepted into UA. Yeah, it says early March, and this is like it's following along with how school years in Japan are set up. So it says, yeah, he has his 10 months in February is when he gets one for all, and he has his entrance exam. And then 1 week later, early March, Izuku's ended up accepted into UA, and then the term begins somewhere around the second week of April. So here since he has some time, a couple of weeks, he's actually been training, getting more used to letting one for all flow, using it at 5%. And we'll say that, like, where is he training? Maybe at Dagobah Beach, but maybe that's a bit too public. So maybe he goes to that forest area that him and Bakugo used to go to when they were younger. Maybe he goes there, trains in one for all, gets used. It's how he keeps his mind off of the fact that All Might hasn't called them back. Although maybe they had a talk briefly after the entrance exams. They had a brief little call, and then especially after he got his results. So he's been telling him like, yeah, you're definitely gonna want to send in your costume design, which I'm still gonna keep the same as in canon for now, because I honestly thought it was sweet that Inko gave that to him. Like, she messed up as most parents do, but and yeah, she definitely fumbled it hard. But seeing how much progress he's been making, see how happy he's been, especially after being accepted, and how determined he's been getting, how well he's been adapting to his quirk, since she definitely doesn't have to worry about him damaging too much. He did still damage his limbs against the 0 pointer, but Recovery Girl was able to fix him up no problem. And seeing how determined he is to improve, she ended up still giving him that same costume, which he's still gonna wear. And we'll say he's properly gotten the hang of 5% and can jump to about 6 to 7%. Can jump from anywhere from 6 to 8% if he needs to. Similarly to before, he rests around 5% and can jump to 6 to 8%. And yeah, we have our beginning of UA, and forgot to mention. So in canon, Bakugo got 77 points, 77 villain points. Here, Midoriya would still get around the same 60 points. And even if you think like, oh, maybe they tone it down because they knew he could control his quirk, and yet he still made such a reckless move, we can easily say that he probably stepped in to help some people in his fights against the other points. So either way, he ends up surpassing 80 points with his 20 plus villain points and his 60 rescue points. He ends up surpassing the 80 mark, and he's the one to receive first place. He ended up getting first place on the entrance exams. And Katsuki saw this and he was pissed. He definitely wants to interrogate Deku, but he notices him and he goes to interrogate him, but everyone else kind of noticed that he's number one. Like, oh, that's the kid who got number one on the test, on the entrance exam. Maybe Ida ends up proclaiming it when he apologizes very loudly in front of everyone. He's like, I'm so sorry that I misjudged you, especially since you were the one to score number one on the entrance exam. And Uraraka ends up coming in. They have their little introduction. He thanks her. She's a little confused before Aizawa makes himself clear. And they end up having their apprehension exam. And Izuku actually places around. He places in like the top 3, top 5, at the very least. Aizawa does criticize his lack of control, but he does also acknowledge the fact that he is making more improvement. And he tells everyone, like, this is the bar to surpass in terms of improving your quirk. Make sure you all make similar levels of improvement with your own abilities, or I'll be casting all of you, or I won't hesitate to expel any one of you. So no one gets expelled, even though we probably all want Mineta to. I wouldn't mind. I'll think about it. By sports festival, I'll come to a decision. But we get into our next day where they have their battle trials. And like I said, Izuku has his same costume, but he's already drawn up a few designs on what he would want for a more advanced costume that he's ready to send in when this one eventually tears apart. He knows for a fact that it's definitely going to be torn apart, but he's still going to wear it for this first day of training. And some people make it different. I don't really care. It's going to be about the same. All the teams are going to be the same, and this time Bakugo and Deku are definitely going to be fighting on much more even ground, especially whenever he jumps up to around 8%, and that's as high as he's willing to go. He's definitely going to be avoiding a lot more attacks, but at the end of the day, he's not as like naturally skilled in combat. He's able to like make that judo flip on Bakugo hurt a lot more, and maybe he slams him so hard he bounces back up high enough for Deku to actually kick him away, punts him like a football, and then he runs away in fear, like, why the hell did I just do that? But it ends up about the same. Maybe he's able to get out of the way of that initial blast. That he'll be fine as long as he dodges. He's able to get out of the way of that, and he's able to avoid having to sacrifice his arm. Maybe he's able to actually rush in and punch the other container that he has, his other grenade gauntlet. He's able to punch it hard enough that it actually ends up breaking. And luckily all it does is just release all that sweat onto the ground, which sounds gross. But as he does so, he's actually able, when he gets in close, he's able to wrap the capture tape around Bakugo, which disqualifies him. And Bakugo is just stuck in silent rage and confusion for just long enough for Deku to move in and this time properly assist Uraraka in taking down Ida. He's able to blitz him with 8%, and at this point his body is really starting to flag. His stamina is wearing out, but he's able to just bolt in and like completely clothesline Ida with like a lariat kind of move. He's able to completely clothesline him, and it really hurts when he hits him in that helmet, that his head, because of his helmet. It really hurts the both of them. Hurts Midoriya's arm and tears up more of his costume, which is already kind of burnt. But yeah, he's able to take down Ida, and Uraraka is able to get her hands on the bomb. Maybe she had created a diversion with, I don't know, whatever. I don't know. She was able to create some kind of diversion, distracting him long enough for him to blitz Ida, and then she captures the weapon. And here Midoriya is the MVP, where it's a bit of a tie between Midoriya and Ida, since Midoriya obviously was the one to come up with the plan and communicate more with Uraraka while she kind of followed along, and he definitely handled more of the combat encounters. But Ida was obviously putting in the most effort to work together. Like, he was putting in more effort because, you know, Midoriya and Uraraka didn't really need to put in much effort. They were able to get along pretty well. But yeah, it probably goes to Izuku. Here, I don't think there would be enough of a change in Izuku's personality to want to be class president, or maybe he steps down to vice president and has Momo be his. He decides to be Momo's vice president instead. So Emergency exit Ida does happen, so maybe we do end up with Ida as the vice president and Momo as the proper president. But we'll see. I'm a little undecided, but either way, or yeah, I'm gonna have Momo be the class president, and Izuku decides to step back as vice president with and he's gonna be asking like Ida for advice, but that distraction still works well enough for the villains to get the information on the class schedule, and then we end up having the USJ. Now this is where things are going to change a little bit more, since Izuku actually sent in he didn't get his costume back just yet, um, but he hasn't gotten his costume back yet. His revised one that's gonna be until after the sports festival. But we'll say he has like some reinforced gloves, or maybe not. I'm gonna just keep it the same in his UA sports uniform. When the USJ occurs, he actually he considers moving with Bakugo and Kirishima, but he's also kind of stuck in place due to the. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. That was a nasty ass burp. But Aizawa's and the fact that he's able to notice 13 preparing to use her quirk, he ends up stepping back, and he actually calls out to Bakugo and Kirishima, but it's too late. They get sent away, and everyone gets split up. He's kind of still frozen in fear due to the whole fact that they're being attacked by villains. He does try to get out of the way, but Kurogiri is able to recapture him, and he still gets sent to the water zone. And here, this is where things start to play out a little bit different. He does still end up using the finger flick, and he kind of files away, like, I'm going to use that for later. But he doesn't use it as devastatingly. He doesn't completely charge it up to 100%. He thinks that might be overkill. We'll say he uses about 40%, and he's able to get the job done. And this is leaving his finger still swollen and most likely bruising, but it's not going to be as devastating as damage to him as Cannon. It's able to get the job done. They're still able, him, Asui, and Mineta are still able to get away with their plan. And when they end up getting to the plaza, he is able to get Sue out of the way. And he pushes Sue and he tosses Mineta. He tosses them both out of the way. And he's the one who's about to get dusted. But Aizawa is still able to use his quirk. And as Tomura is like, as Shigaraki is turned around to like, make that "you're so cool, erase your head" comment, Izuku just lashes out with a Spartan kick straight to his chest, cutting him off mid-sentence and sending him flying away. And in response, Nomu immediately lets go and goes to catch Tomura. So this is where the battle begins, and Izuku ends up taking on any remaining heroes as Shigaraki, or any remaining thug villains, like any fodder villains that are remaining. He's able to take them out pretty quick using 8%. He's still pushing his limit, and Shigaraki is trying to catch his breath, but he's glaring at the kid, and he ends up making the order to the Nomu to go take care of that green-haired brat. And like this is happening as Midoriya finally finished off the last of the fodder, and he ends up going to go check up on Aizawa, and just as he's about to get hit by the Nomu, we'll say that Todoroki comes in. This is where Todoroki, Bakugo, and Kirishima end up showing up. Todoroki comes in with a giant wall of ice, an iceberg to briefly freeze him in place, and with a yell from Bakugo like, "Move the hell out of the way, nerd!" as he jumps in to blow up the Nomu. This it gets him to move back into action. He's 5%. He's at 5%, and he moves Aizawa away from the plaza. Because here he didn't really get to communicate his plan properly to Sue and Mineta before getting interrupted. He kind of just shot away as quickly as he could and went directly into the battle. So he actually gets them to where Mineta and Sue are currently hiding, tells them to get back to the entrance and to wait there with 13 to get whatever orders that he can, and make sure that everyone is as grouped up as they possibly can before he moves back to the battlefield. And but eventually, I'm pretty sure this is where All Might comes in. As the kids are kind of witnessing what the hell this Nomu is capable of, All Might ends up coming in, and the battle between the Nomu and All Might goes just about the same. Although he does quickly tell him like the kind of strength and speed that he has, it practically matched his, and they're able to. They end up getting to that similar situation where the Nomu has his. He ends up piercing All Might's side, and they have a similar confrontation. Like I said, it all goes just about the same, except where when Izuku jumps in to punch Tomura away from the weakened All Might, he actually goes with another finger flick instead of trying to jump in. He launches another finger flick, this time powered up to complete 100%. He doesn't want that Kurugiri guy getting in the way, so he'll blow him away if he even tries, which does end up working, and he's able to knock Tomura back, which and after as soon as he lands, he ends up getting shot by Snipe, who had to take a second to readjust after Midoriya ended up involving himself. But here it ends up ending about the same, although Tomura is definitely much more targeting Izuku than ever before. Uh, and Ida still ended up leaving, similar to Lee in canon. He's not the class rep, but he is still talked into leaving by everyone else. We'll say like whoever is there, like Uraraka and Mina, or they're like, what would Midoriya ask you to do? And he like comes to the logical conclusion that Midoriya would definitely have him go out and save as many people as he could by getting in contact with the teachers. He would put everyone else before himself by going to get proper help. So he was still talked into going, and the USJ is fixed up. We don't have to worry about Midoriya breaking any more limbs. This time he only broke 2 fingers. And yeah, we end up moving on to the sports festival. Everyone is preparing. Midoriya has been doing some extra training. Um, yeah, yeah. Second week of April, around Thursday-ish, um, they get told, yeah, they're preparing for the sports festival. Um, around 2 weeks later, yeah. Okay, Aizawa announces the sports festival the next day. Um, All Might and Zuko, instead of having their talk like they did in canon, maybe he opens up a little bit more about One for All and his master. He talks a little bit about his master, and he's still hesitant to bring up All for One, but he does tell him that he that One for All's backstory is very long and complicated, and it stretches to the very dawn of Quirks, and it has an arch nemesis that may be the mastermind behind the USJ incident. But he tells him not to worry about it, that he'll be able to take care of it before he retires and passes the torch on to Izuku and his generation. And he ends up asking Izuku about like what kind of training he's been doing, and he shows him his progress with full cowling. He's planning to get to around 10% for the festival, but All Might points something out. He asks him why he's leaking out his energy, and he's a little shocked. He's like, "What do you mean?" And All Might points out that well, there have been moments where where the energy will leak out whenever his concentration isn't at its highest. He's never had it constantly leak out like that, although he does suppose that Izuku is dealing with more energy than he did. And because of this, Izuku actually has 2 goals to prepare for the sports festival: to develop a secondary technique where he focuses all the energy inside of his body instead of letting it leak out like full cowling, and to get full cowling to 10%. Which he does end up doing. He gets full cowling to 10%, and he develops an experimental technique that he's calling full drive, where he has all of the energy completely contained in his body. And if you want an idea, you can think of it like the difference between Super Saiyan and full power Super Saiyan, or like Super Saiyan Blue and perfected Super Saiyan Blue in the manga, where instead of letting his energy leak out, he's using the same power, but he's using it as maximum efficiency. So it's the same amount of energy. He's still at 10%, but it's going to take a much more concentration, and he's going to have to practice it to the point where it becomes negligible in terms of concentration and like stamina drain. It's going to be a little difficult, but like, ooh, sorry, I had a bit of a burp. I had to speed up my speech there, but it's going to be difficult for him to get properly mastered, but it gives him a similar effect as to what happens with All Might. It causes him to swell up a bit, increase in muscular and just overall size and stature. It causes his bones and everything to grow. So yeah, and so because of that, he ends up revising. He ends up adding a little revision to his costume. He like adds to make the material be able to stretch with his body because he's developed a new facet of his quirk. And oh, and just to get this out of the way, because he's a little bit more open with his quirk analysis, even if it is mainly to himself. Um, Around the time of the sports festival, we'll say like when the cheerleading incident happens, he actually points out to like Momo and Hagakure like about their costumes and like how you can get that stuff made from your DNA, so it doesn't have to be so revealing. So yeah, they're gonna get proper costumes. You can think of whatever you want, but Momo's not gonna look like a teenage stripper, and Hagakure isn't gonna be walking around in the nude. Uh, but yeah, basically, just a side note, I guess. But yeah. Anyways, we end up going into the sports festival. The thing with Tensei is still gonna happen, sadly. But the sports festival occurs and it goes all about the same. The events are gonna still be the same. We end up getting into the race as the first portion, and Izuku is ready. He blitzes off with 10%, and he's easily able to surpass most of his class and everyone else. He leaps over the ice that Todoroki ends up forming. He notices that he gets ready with like a when he releases like a little frosty breath. So he steps back for a moment. He lets him freeze, and then he jumps over, similarly to how Momo and Bakugo did. And he ends up leading the charge. He even ends up surpassing Bakugo and Todoroki for a bit. When it gets to like the platforms, they're able to catch up, but he quickly goes. He takes the second to let the energy, to let the electricity come back into his body, and he goes into full drive, and he's able to leap across like one or two platforms at a time, and is able to quickly regain his lead. He ends up coming across the robots once more, and he's able to easily plow through them. And he takes some of the scrap. Like as he's plowing through them, he'll grab like one of the metal plates from the arms, just in case he needs it in the future. He has no idea what for, but he knows that Bakugo may be willing to play dirty, and that Shoto is going completely for the win. So he's not going to be taking any chances. He ties it around his back. He takes a second to tie it around his back and to shift back into full cowling, because he has a sizable amount of lead. And he ends up continuing with his sprint. Eventually, Bakugo and Todoroki are able to close some of the distance, but it doesn't. It only ends up mattering when Midoriya seems to pause in front of the minefield, and he still comes up with the same ideas in canon. Although he's able to get through with it much quicker. The only people to surpass him are like Bakugo and Todoroki, and maybe like who was ever in like the first 10 places in canon. Maybe they get a little bit ahead of him, but he's able to quickly surpass all of them. He makes that big old explosion, and the second he crosses, he ends up coming to right between Shoto and Bakugo. He slams him down. He slams the piece of metal down once more, creates that explosion that completely knocks him off, and he charges forward in 10%. He ends up landing in a perfect roll, and he blitzes forward at full drive and is able to clear as first place in the sports festival with a sizable lead. And oh yeah, I forgot. Since he placed first on the entrance exam, he was the one to give the speech. He gives a speech briefly about everyone here wanting to prove themselves, whether it be as heroes, as engineers, or as just their own individuals. Since he does notice the animosity that's kind of directed towards the hero course. He's like, everyone's here to prove themselves for who they really are on the inside, and he hopes that Japan is willing to watch as they all show the world what it is they're made of, and what kind of people are going to be leading as the leaders of the next generation. So he actually builds up a decent amount of goodwill. 1B might not be as antagonistic towards 1A, but yeah, it doesn't make too much of a difference. Just that everyone views Class 1A and him in particular in a very good light. But then we end up getting to the cavalry battle. Now this ends up being about the same. Ida still wants to go off on his own, and Izuku's sheer confidence definitely draws in Uraraka. She's just as willing, if not even a little more, to team up with him. Maybe he does get a little teary-eyed. It's not as explosive, but he definitely is a little teary-eyed. He's very grateful, and he reaches out to Tokoyami, and he's approached by Mei Hatsume, who actually approaches him not only as number one of the sports festival, but also as her personal client. And she makes note that she asks him directly. She's able to somehow memorize his name. If he is Izuku Midoriya, and he says yes, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm working on your hero costume." And because of this, they all end up teaming up, and it goes about the same. But Izuku is able to keep people at bay. Let's say with like some full cowl slashes of air, he's able to create gusts of wind that are able to not cause people to stumble, and he'll briefly power up to around 15% with his finger flicks. He doesn't have them at 20% just yet, but they're around 15%. They're bruising his fingers, but it's nothing too damaging. He's able to keep people off his back, and here he's actually able to just weave out of the way by jumping into full drive. He notices Tenya getting ready for some kind of technique, and he doesn't really like the look of sheer determination in his eyes. So he's able to blitz out. He's able to just lean out of the way, where Todoroki isn't able to grab the 1 million mark. He grabs one of the other ones, and but Dark Shadow does still make his adorable little contribution to the team. But here it's Izuku who gets into first place, Todoroki, Bakugo, and then the Class 1B team, or not the Class 1B team, sorry. Um, Same teams as in canon, the Shinso team. And then we end up moving on to the next phase, the tournament. Yeah, because it was only the four teams, right? Whatever. We end up with the same people. Ojiro and that 1B guy still decide to drop out due to what Shinso ended up pulling. Um, and Ojiro does still let him know about what it is that what he, what his quirk is. And then we get to the sports festival. MHA bracket. Bracket. Good, good, good. I need the bracket. I don't need to know what people would like for their second one. Okay, I just need to see what it was in canon. Sorry, I'm getting it like from everyone else what they would have wanted to see for like second year or whatever, and this is really starting to bother me. Okay, okay, so it's Midoriya versus Shinso, Todoroki versus Sero, Shiozaki versus Kaminari, Ida versus Hatsume, Ashido versus Aoyama, Tokoyami versus Yayorozu, Tetsu versus Kirishima, and Uraraka versus Bakugo. So literally everything except the Shinso and Todoroki fights are going to be the same. Um, Maybe Uraraka is willing to listen to a few extra points. Maybe instead of like giving her a complete plan, he instead offers to give a few tips about Bakugo's fighting style, which he does take into consideration, but does eventually end the same. But his battle with Shinso, he decides to he can clearly see he has a chip on his shoulder, so he doesn't go all out from the start. He hears him out. He doesn't end up actually speaking, or maybe he does. Maybe Shinso is able to hit a sensitive nerve, maybe with that first comment. So he still does end up breaking his finger to break out of Shinso's hold. And he sees the One for All ghosts, the vestiges, and he can actually see them a little bit more clearly, much more in detail. You can see colors specifically surrounding each and every one of them. But he does end up winning. He doesn't end up getting like a bloody nose. He's able to weave out of the way and is able to um, get Shinso to the end of the ring before judo flipping him out. And they do still have their talk, and they do still develop their friendship. Like I said, all the canon matches go to the same. Shiozaki still completely folds Sim Kaminari. Todoroki is still his usual self, so he completely ices over Sero. Ida and Hatsume still completely embarrasses Ida. Same with Ashido against Aoyama. Same with Tokoyami versus Yayorozu. Maybe since Deku has a bit of a relationship in that he's her vice president, he actually goes to go check up on her and gives her some word of encouragement. So she's going to be beginning her rebuilding of her confidence a little bit earlier, or at least it's going to get a little bit of kick in the butt so that it can jumpstart is going to get a little bit of a kickstart. Tetsu Tetsu versus Kirishima still ends the same, as does Bakugo versus Uraraka, though she's making a much more obvious improvement. Um, she puts a much more valiant effort, or at least a more tactical one. So she's able to progress a little more. Maybe instead of completely collapsing, she's actually able to get in close. But he quickly notices that that she basically loses consciousness halfway through her charge, and actually surprisingly shows some decent amount of respect and actually catches her. He does still have his little confrontation with Deku, but that ends up not really going anywhere. So we're going to get to the battle against Todoroki, and this is where things are obviously going to change. Deku is able to maneuver himself easily around his launches of ice, but he is still talking to him throughout the battle, and he is able to get him to realize that like he clearly shows like he uses full drive throughout the battle, and he makes it clear that he's putting it in his all. He's straining his body to the absolute limit. He gives him a little bit of insight into how his quirk works, the stockpiling aspect, and how he has to build up so much power, and how he can't properly control it. But he's putting in more effort than Todoroki is. 10% of his power, and it's all he can manage to control. Yet Todoroki can easily go 100% whenever he wants, and he's choosing to cripple himself. He criticizes and tears down whatever argument Todoroki tries to give before giving that same speech of it's your quirk, not his. And he does still end up going to 100%, but we'll say he uses the other arm instead of the arm that he may have used against the zero pointer. Because here he's only broken he's broken both of his legs once. He's broken some of his fingers a few times, and bruised them as well. And he only broke his right arm once against the zero pointer. So here he leads with his left arm, and is able to avoid any kind of crippling damage, especially since he only used 20%, which, while double his current limit, he let himself use full cowl instead of full drive, so that it wouldn't be as stressful on his body. And because of this, he's able to recover in time for all of the other matches to finish. Ida ends up beating Shiozaki. Tokoyami wins his battle against Mina, and Bakugo ends up winning his battle against Kirishima. Again, a lot of these are the same, but this is where things are going to change. We end up getting Deku versus Ida, and with 10%, with access to 10%, even in full cowling, it's enough for him to outspeed Ida. Although Ida is definitely better at charging in a straight line, Izuku has the advantage in being able to move. He had, what is it, horizontal movement. He's able to move left to right. He's able to stand himself. So he's able to lure Ida into a bit of a trap. Sorry, more gas. But Ida initially doesn't fall for it, but he does fall for the second feint. And it's enough to get him to stumble, since he used Reciprocal Burst. And Midoriya briefly went into full drive, was able to get around Ida and kick him off of the stadium. They have a respectable, but he ends up holding his hand out, brings him back up, and they have a respectable conversation after, where they trade some tips, mainly Ida trading some tips on how to better use his kicks and on his combat style, and he lends these tips to Izuku, which he's all for. And then we end up getting to the other fights, the other fight of Tokoyami versus Bakugo, which goes the same. And we get to our final match of Deku versus Bakugo, a rematch, no more technicalities to hold any of them back. Deku at this point, he was able to keep any strain on his body to the absolute minimum and was able to get back to Recovery Girl for a brief checkup where she finished healing up any lingering injuries he may have had. He's a little tired, but he's going to be able to go at this final match with all that he has, which he definitely does. And it ends up getting to the point where Bakugo is ready to release his howitzer impact. They're definitely they end up getting into a bit of a shouting match in the middle of their battle. They end up venting some frustrations. Surprisingly, some more on Deku's side. He's much more confident in himself, at least at this point, than he was in canon. He's more confident and sure of himself, thanks to reinforcement from All Might and Inko, since he's developed a bit of closer bonds with the two of them. He's definitely been getting some more positive reinforcement. and he's not gonna allow Bakugo to just completely walk over him. He's not just gonna like acknowledge his point. Like, I understand where he's coming from. He does, but he doesn't care. Bakugo has been a horrible person for a long time, and he vents out some of his frustrations. And eventually, Deku is able to pull out the wind just barely. He ends up using his the fingers on his left hand for this, and he's able to release a strong enough wind blast that is able to, if not disperse, then um, cause his howitzer impact to. If he's not able to knock him out of the air as he's trying to land his howitzer impact, he's able to create enough of a knockback that they basically cancel out. He jumps it up to 20% once more, and he's able to create enough pushback that they basically cancel each other out. Although since Bakugo is in the air, he's actually sent flying out of the ring, and Deku is kind of just sent onto his back. He skids towards near the edge of the ring, but it's Bakugo who ends up landing outside. And because of this, Deku ends up winning the UA Sports Festival. Um, Bakugo doesn't need to be chained up. That does not need to happen. He does not need to be chained up in front of a live audience by a whole bunch of adults. But he is definitely sulking a little bit. He's pouting to himself, but he does acknowledge the fact that Deku was somehow able to match his signature attack, and he ends up swearing in private, or perhaps he does it in front of everyone, that he's going to surpass him and claim the he's going to claim first place in the next sports festival, and beyond that, he's going to be the one to reach number one, to reach the goal of his of being number one hero. And Deku ends up publicly also as well claiming that he's not going to make it easy for him, and he's going to win first place in every for the rest of their school career, and he'll be the one to climb up to the rank of the number one hero. And this actually gets everyone fired up because even though it's clear Bakugo is kind of doing it from a place of arrogance, there's also some level of begrudging respect. It's developing a lot earlier. There's some level of begrudging respect between the two of them, and they're going to be settling things a little bit easier from here. After this, they end up, Ida still gets his call about Tensei, and Todoroki does go visit his mother. He was able to get a lot more contemplation time to himself since he ended up losing his battle against Deku. He gets a lot of contemplation time about what he heard and what Midoriya ended up telling him, and he does still go to meet up with his mom. Everyone chooses their hero names, and Bakugo is still on that Lord Explosion murder bullcrap. But we'll say that since Deku's a little more open, he actually talks brief. He actually makes an effort to more involve Todoroki with his friend group of Ida, Yaoyorozu, Uraraka, and possibly Jiro, since she hangs around Yaoyorozu a lot, and Suyu as well. Um, so after they initially choose their names, and he goes with Shoto, he actually asks him. He gives him a few ideas of what he actually wants to be called. Sorry. I don't know if he ended up coming up with something in canon. I'm pretty sure he hasn't at this point. But he ends up coming up with a better placeholder name than Shoto, and he probably comes up with something like Frostburn, something like that. Flash Freeze, something cool. Fro- that was not a pun. But yeah, he comes up with something like Frostburn or some kind of name that has some kind of duality to it, representing his half hot, half cold nature, especially now that he's going to train with his father. Um, so here, Deku has a lot more internship offers, but he does still decide to go with Gran Torino on All Might's suggestion. He tells him about how he helped him train in properly using One for All, and he tells him that he's in on the secret, and he ends up informing him. He ends up taking this opportunity to tell him about everyone who's informed. He tells him that, like, oh, his old partner from his early days from Island, who now is working at Island. He knows some things, but he doesn't know the truth about One for All. He does know some of the nature of the work that he did, though. He tells him about Night Eye and how he knows about One for All, how they had a bit of a falling out. He's already learned about the principal. He's learned about the principal. He's learned about Recovery Girl, and he's learned about Namasa. So yeah, he's finally told properly who actually knows, and he does end up going with his internship with Gran Torino. And here, since he's actually been practicing kicks like in his off time, and he's been getting some tips from he got a few notes from Ida on what to properly use. He actually added in he's gotten instead of getting that second suit, he's on his third suit, which is hold on, what are they called? I think it was like his gamma suit where he has the hold on, Deku gamma suit. Yeah, okay, I was right. Where he gets the Iron Souls for his shoot style and the added protection for his arms. That's going to be his current suit. He's jumped the gun a little bit, but he's added that definitely wants to be able to take care of his arms and his legs. So this is going to be what he has, and he's around that 10% for both full cowling and full drive. And in his training with Gran Torino, they end up instantly getting down to business. Deku is just barely able to get out of the way of him trying to attack him the first time, and he gets his clothes on and he gets his costume on, and he gets ready. He has to adjust a little bit for the Iron Souls, but Gran Torino actually helps him develop his shoot style here, and he also develops him on his focus in full drive. And he wants him to instead of focusing on building up his percentage in full cal, he tells him to do it from full drive so that it becomes much more second nature, and that full cowl can be something to be used against weaker enemies, while full drive can be saved for proper threats. And so he's going to be upping his percentage a little bit, but since he's focusing it while in full drive, it's going to be a little bit slow going. He gets more adjusted to using 10%, and he gets to the point where he can make similar jumps to around 2 to 3%. So he's able to jump from like 10 to briefly 12 or 13%. But it's much more safer for him to use full cal. And because of this, he's actually able to make progress in full cal much quicker. He can actually use that whatever is his like emergency limit in full drive will be his safe limit in full cal, and he'll be able to move it even further in full cal. But obviously, full drive is just much more powerful. It just requires a lot more concentration that he doesn't accidentally let go of the energy and it completely tears apart his body. Causes his limbs to shoot off of his body. But yeah, everything is going about the same in terms of the internships. Um, Maybe because of Bakugo's open declaration, he gets an invitation from Endeavor. He actually sees a little bit of himself in Bakugo. So sadly, he's not going to get his internship with Best Jeanist. He's actually going to go to Endeavor with Todoroki, and they end up developing a bit of a banterous relationship, similarly to how they do in canon. But since Bakugo has a bit of a grudging respect for Deku, and he ends up hearing a little bit like he's able to quickly recognize, and like in canon, he also heard that conversation Deku and Todoroki had. So he knows about the fact that Endeavor is a bit of a scumbag. So he's not going to be completely modeling himself after him, but he's going to be learning from him. He's going to be learning how to properly handle the heat and impact generated by his explosions. They're going to become more powerful and much more potent. And he's probably going to be getting to that AP style, that armor piercing style of his, much more quicker. He might be developing his AP shot a little early, and that AP shot where he fires it like rapid fire. But or at least he's gonna get to the beginnings of it. And since he's training with Todoroki, he's able to push Todoroki to get more used to his flames. He couldn't get a battle with him in the sports festival, so he wants to see what he can do now. So he's definitely gonna be pushing him. Um, yeah, Zuko gets his few days of training against Gran Torino, and they, instead of having to develop full cowl on his second day, by the second day he's getting more and more used to full drive. Stain and Shigaraki have their same meeting, although Stain publicly he ends up openly praising that green-haired boy from the sports festival who has a drive that seems to match All Might's, and shows his and makes like a little comment about that explosive brat who, while he definitely seems to have the strength, seems to be more like Endeavor than anyone else. Um, which irritates Shigaraki. But it's the third day. Everyone meets in Hosu, and the fight with Stain ends up happening. Although when he sends his message out, and Todoroki ends up getting it, um, Bakugo ends up following him. The two of them are the ones to arrive to assist in the battle against Stain, and here Midoriya is actually able to hold his own. He may be nicked once, but he's definitely not gonna. But if anything, he's actually probably able to avoid it. He jumps in with full cowl, but the second he realizes it's Stain, he switches to full drive and is able to gather Ida and Native, and he attempts to run away with them, but Stain is able to draw him into a confrontation. He tells them like if you really he gives him like a little test. He's like, there's plenty of chaos being strewn about. While I may not be in league with those that one group of villains, it's not exactly below me to take this opportunity to weed out the fake heroes attempting to make some glory for themselves, which draws Midoriya into a confrontation, but he still is able to send his message. Bakugo and Todoroki arrive, and the three of them are able to take down Stain. And even if they're not, the surprise intervention of Ida, who's finally regained mobility, is able to deal the final blow. Him and Deku are able to deal matching kicks in speed and power to knock him down. And for good measure, Bakugo and Todoroki each release an explosion and gout of flame before Todoroki completely freezes him over. And they do end up tying him up, and they end up leaving the alleyway a little earlier. So maybe they do get involved in fighting one of the Nomu, but they are still caught off guard when Deku, who is a bit exhausted from using full drive in such a serious life or death intense battle, is still caught off guard enough that he ends up getting grabbed. He tries to put a struggle, but with the way that it's grabbing his shoulders, he's having a little issue getting a proper angle. He tries to swing his legs up, and at the same time, Bakugo and Todoroki are trying to intervene. But they all end up getting interrupted by Stain. He still has his bloodlust that ends up freezing everyone. Even Deku is thrown off of his game, despite the fact that he's been radiating Big Dick Shonen protagonist energy this entire time. They all get frozen. He has his little confrontation with both Endeavor, and he calls out the Bakugo brat. But the damage is even more intense, so he still ends up collapsing as he's standing. Their injuries are less intense, but Ida was still damaged in his leg, so he's gonna have to be more careful. Deku and Todoroki were able to avoid any serious damage. Maybe he did still get cut in his arm, but maybe Deku was also able to intervene and catch them by their handles, or Bakugo was able to blast them away. Either way, everyone's avoided serious injury except for Ida, but even then, Recovery Girl can help him out with that. And All For One and everyone else All For One is watching everything from the shadows. All the other internships are about the same, but since Deku is like regularly practicing his stances and all that on his own, maybe he actually gave some tips. Maybe he's a little bit more of the reason as to why Uraraka decided to go to Gunhead, or at the very least, she actually briefly makes more of a mention of him. They're gonna be a lot more bonded. But they're gonna be all of these people are gonna be like they're gonna have some closer relationships. Stain's whole little message ends up going viral, and since they don't have to really be properly hospitalized, although they are chastised, they're able to get back to their training. Except for Ida, he has to deal with the most flack. He's decided to take most of the flack. Bakugo and Todoroki get out pretty quickly, as does Deku, and they're able to get back into their training. They maybe lost a day or two out of their week-long internship. And Deku is getting more and more used to his shoot style after seeing Ida pull off a few moves in their battle against Stain, and maybe he's come up with a bit of idea based off of Ida and his brother. He wants to kind of honor the two of them. Ida is a really good friend, so he sends in. He has some plans to meet up with Hatsume, and if you've searched up like Deku upgrade to his suit, like if you search up Deku suit redesign, if you know the one from that art book, uh, hero suit redesign. There's one that came from like this art book where he has like these air-based jet boosters. Or if you searched up, was it My Pineapple Academia? I think that's his channel name. Yeah, Vocal Pineapple Academia. Search that up on YouTube and search up Deku needs an upgrade. He covers like this cool piece of fan art, and this is basically going to be his suit going forward. It's gonna have like these. It's gonna have these cool black shoulder pads with red stripes down them, and he's still gonna have the he's still gonna have the steel soles, the iron soles for his shoes, but on his legs, like on his calves and on his arms, they're gonna have these air boosters. Basically, they're able to collect air. Let's say like some air pressure as he's moving about. They capture air pressure, and they're able to release it so that he can speed up his punches, and it'll help him. It'll just help him. It's like a little bit of an homage to the Ingeniums that he looks up to and works with now. And it also gives him the idea to properly develop his Air Force gauntlets. And so that's gonna be what he's gonna have that he's gonna send that into Hatsume when he gets back from his internships. But for now, he's gonna be rocking his gamma suit. Um, yeah, they get back from their internship. Izuku and Gran Torino have bonded a little bit. We'll say that in helping since they've had more time to actually train with one another, and since All Might himself opened up a little bit about his master, Izuku actually asks about her. He asks Gran Torino about her and like what it was like training Toshinari when he was younger, and all that stuff. So he gets a little bit of insight as to who Nana Shimura was, and like what her fighting style was, what her quirk was. He learns a little bit about that, and that's gonna be important. Izuku ends up by the end of his training, he's at around 15%. He can handle 15% in full cowling, and the same in his full drive. That's like his hard limit in full drive. He can handle 15%. He's gotten it so that he he initially had like a bit of a difference in what he can handle at the beginning of the week, but now he's at a point where he can handle the same in full cowling and full drive. The only difference is that he can't make any jumps in percentage while in full drive. He can make brief jumps while in full cowling because it lets the energy pour out, but he can't do that for full drive. But in full drive, it's more powerful to begin with, so he doesn't really need to make any jumps in power. Um, yeah, they end up having their little exam when they get back to class, where like they have the race, and Izuku very easily clears it. He's shown so much progress, and he's able to blitz forward with his 15%. And this is where All Might finally decides to reveal everything about All for One and One for All. Let's say that Gran Torino briefly mentioned it, and he briefly talked to Toshinori, like, you really got to tell that kid. So he ends up telling him about everything. And they get their first mentions of the end of term test. And because of this, Izuku ends up having a dream. The week before the test, he ends up having a dream. Shortly after his talk with Toshinori, where he briefly sees some memories of like the old One for All users. Basically, what he had in the last season, season 4, season 3. I think it was season 4, where he has that dream where he briefly sees the memories of the first holder, and maybe he sees some memories from Nana Shimura. And when he wakes up in his home, the room's a bit of a mess. There was definitely like a loud explosion of his power. His room is a bit of a mess. His bedroom window's cracked and has broken open, and he's floating above the bed. And his mom rushes in, and we get in like a homecoming scene with Aunt May. What the? And Izuku ends up calming down his mom, and he makes a decision. He opens up to his mom. He tells her that he has something important to tell her, and he talks to All Might, gets him on the phone, and gets him to visit. And they explain everything to his mom, who's freaking out, But over the course of the week, they're able to settle things. Maybe they meet up at UA and talk with the principal. She's definitely worried about One for All and All for One in particular, the Nomus and the League of Villains. But they end up deciding that they can't hold anything back. And Iko herself has a lot of confidence in Izuku and how far he's come. And even though she's definitely worried, she's a lot more self-assured. He hasn't suffered any kind of permanent damage to his arms and his hands. He's had a few broken bones, but and like a few bruised fingers and all that kind of stuff. But he hasn't actually gotten to the point where he has like the scars all along his hands and his arms. So she's relatively confident, especially since All Might is still capable of doing hero work, that everything can be handled. Although she's going to be more aware of everything going forward. And Deku has to do some training. Over the course of the week, he actually has to meet up with Gran Torino again. And after school every day, he meets up with, like, let's say at a warehouse that All Might has rented out, where he and Gran Torino are able to practice float. Gran Torino gives him some tips, and he's not going to be getting majorly good at it, but he gains some decent control to where he can turn it on and off, and he can direct himself using finger flicks. Similarly to how Gran Torino launches himself with air pressure, he's trying to learn how to do the same for now until he can get better control over it. And maybe he brings in Uraraka since they're a little bit more of a closer friendship. He doesn't tell her about One for All, but he does tell her that his quirk is a stockpiling quirk, which is what he put down instead of just superpower. He tells her it's a stockpiling quirk that reacts to his emotions. It's built up a lot of energy. That's why he was considered a late bloomer. It's one of those quirks that's extremely dangerously powerful. So he can never properly use it as a kid. And when he was preparing himself for UA, it's like the quirk is connected to his emotions. This is what he explains. That it's connected to his emotions, and when he was preparing himself to UA, he was constantly envisioning All Might in his head, and it allowed him to use the stockpile energy to give himself a lot of strength, to give himself that physical strength to rival All Might's. And that's why whenever he uses that full power, his body still isn't ready for it, but it can nearly match All Might's, which she ends up conceding. And she asks him, well, why did he develop float? And maybe he gives like a little bit of an embarrassed answer that he was actually thinking of her and his friends. Like, he was thinking of his friends, but he was thinking of her in particular. And it's specifically why he also asked her to help him out. He was thinking about, like, for the first time in a long time, he's had friends that he can really rely on. And Uraraka's concern over everyone after the events in Hosu really warmed his heart. And it really got to him, and because of that, this facet of his quirk manifested. And this is what he worked this out with Nezu as well, and this is what they give to Aizawa, so that he kind of allows the two to train. And maybe he also shows her what he's learned from like All Might and Gran Torino in combat, so that they can practice some quirkless sparring in her gunhead martial arts, and she can help him with float. But they do still only have a week, so they're not able to make too much progress. Enough where he can, like I said, he can turn it on and off, and he can direct himself when he launches blasts of air pressure. And when we get to the finals, they're going to be split up just about the same. There's no real reason to change it up, especially since Aizawa doesn't want to give these teams synergy. He wants to really pit them against each other in a sense. Not out of maliciousness, but just to force them to recognize how to work properly with each other. So we end up all getting the same, although I never really decided if I would have Shinso replace Mineta. He hasn't been too important since the sports festival, but we'll say that he replaces her. We'll say that Shinso ended up replacing Mineta. Because I know a lot of people, I know that there are people out there who like him, but I don't really think he's going to be too important going forward. And he ends up getting replaced. Shinso ends up coming in, and he's been training with Aizawa, and he was the one to replace him, and he went on the internship with Aizawa specifically. Or we'll have it so like Shinso participates in his own final exam, and if he passes and Mineta fails, then Shinso will replace Mineta. but he's gonna have to pass him in both the practical and the written exam, which he seems like a smart kid. He might be able to score better than Mineta. Just barely. He just barely managed to edge out. But Mineta, even though he does pass his own exam, uh, or yeah, he did end up passing his own exam. Do I want to replace him? Nah, we'll keep Mineta around, but Shinso has definitely been upping his training with Aizawa, especially since Midoriya has made himself such a clear figure to everyone in kicking down and being involved in the fight against Stain and in placing first in the sports festival. He sees him as like a goal to strive towards, but he's also, learning under Aizawa. But he has his own little exam, and he's going to be training more under Aizawa. It's going to be a little obvious to everyone. But yeah, Deku and Bakugo versus All Might. Oh boy. So Bakugo has developed his explosions to be much more powerful than before, thanks to Endeavor's training and his training with Todoroki. So they're gonna be much more powerful. And Deku himself is able to use 15% full drive, which is more powerful than Ken and Deku at 20% when he first, like after his internships with Endeavor, where he was like 20% full cowl. It's more powerful than that. Not as well developed. His movements aren't as fluid. He's still months younger with months less experience, but he's going to be handling himself much better in this exam than he did in canon. Um, it's going to end up being about the same, but they're not as beaten up. They're not as in bad of a shape. Um, Deku was probably able to use one of his Air Force techniques, his finger flicks, to add some concussive force to one of Bakugo's explosions. Maybe he fired off a single AP shot, one of those ranged one that shot out like a little Dragon Ball Z attack, and he added a finger flick at like an Air Force at like 20% full cowl to increase like the concussive explosion of it to get some distance between them and All Might. And maybe eventually they're able to, instead of making it through the gate, maybe they're able to, or yeah, if his punch at like 5% was able to get All Might to drop to his knees with a 15% at least in full cowl, Deku and a much more powerful Bakugo, they're definitely going to be able to get him to drop to his knees a lot faster, and they're able to clear through the gate. They still do make the decision to leave. This is still fucking All Might, but they are able to win it a little faster, and they do have a little bit more synergy. They do still have an argument, but Bakugo doesn't end up slapping him. They just kind of get in each other's faces for a brief moment. But Deku is keeping himself calm but firm, and Bakugo is kind of loud but also kind of understanding where he's coming from. As brash as he is, he does recognize the fact that this is still fucking All Might. But yeah, the tests end about the same. Um, we'll say that Uraraka doesn't end up freaking out. She actually is calm-minded enough, or maybe she does, since she kind of just got an indirect message from Deku that he was thinking about her when he developed his quirk. Um, but since they're a lot more closer, maybe she does still kind of freak out. But she actually comes up with a plan instead of having to be tricked into it by Aoyama. But because of her coming up with a plan, he still does make the comment that causes her to have to engage in her plan early, and she kind of gives him a stern look after the exam, and he's like a little sheepish about it. But yeah, it all ends about the same. Um, Toga and Dabi and everyone else still gets to join the League of Villains, and we end up getting the day after where they have their meetup at the mall. And yeah, the mall thing goes about the same, although Deku probably isn't as terrified. And Ochako herself is just, instead of just being stuck and stuttering, she's actually ready to almost rush in. But she does still get stopped by Deku, and he does still have he asks his question about what does All for One want, or instead, since he's in front of everyone, he asks, what does your master want? And this kind of piques Uraraka's interest. He's like, what does Deku know about his master? What is he talking about master? But she ends up keeping that to herself. Inko is definitely more worried since she's more aware of the situation, so she's about as worried in canon. But he's able to reassure her nothing happened, and he actually had a plan to he had a plan that he would have been able to use to get him off and to restrain him. And without confident and sure of himself, instead of like having to be all worried and desperately explain, he's able to reassure her. He had a bit of a plan himself. He was going to use the electricity that he's been. It's been something he's been thinking about experimenting with the electricity of Full Cowl to actually make use of it in battle, since he might as well make use of it if it's going to be one of the main factors of Full Cowl, since he's been gaining more control of the One for All energy. It's something he considers. But yeah, and at this point, this is about uh, yeah. Okay, we have the class of the. They end up all returning to class, and everything is about the same. And we have our beginning of summer break. Now, I think this is where I'm going to end it, or I'm going to. I'm actually going to jump into the events of Island, and I do consider the movies canon. So I'm actually going to jump into the movies, into the first movie real quick, and I'm going to cover that basically as quick as possible. Instead of needing to get an invite from All Might, he gets his invitation in the mail for the ticket to Island and his plus one, but he also does still get an invitation from All Might. So what he does is that he asks All Might if he can cover for bringing his mom, while he brings along Uraraka as his plus one specifically. Um, and everyone does still end up at Island, but it's the fact that he specifically makes an offer to Uraraka that's going to matter here. They're getting a little bit, they're exploring themselves a little bit more, and Inko and Toshinori do not at all hesitate to tease the two of them about it. But they all end up at Island, and here it's Deku and Uraraka who are introduced to Melissa, and Uraraka is definitely a little jealous, but she also gets to know her straight from the get-go as well. Oh, sorry about that. I'm gonna have to pause for a brief second. I'm getting a phone call. Had a phone call from my mom. She's picking up some food. But so I'm gonna wrap this up for the film. Uraraka and Melissa actually end up getting along, and Melissa ends up bringing them both in to learn about the Full Gauntlet. She tells them both about it, and Uraraka is actually, she mentions that like, oh, that sounds like something that'd be good for you, Deku. And Melissa briefly questions, and he's like, oh yeah, he grew up as a late bloomer, and his since it's so strong, his power is almost a lot like All Might's, but he can't control it all that well. The two of us have been training as well as with everyone else and all the teachers at UA, and Melissa still makes the offer. She gives him the Full Gauntlet, and he's kind of admiring it for a bit. But Uraraka is the one to bluntly ask, "Well, how do you turn it off?" So how do you turn it off? How do you take it off? And she ends up showing them, so that he can slip it into his pocket instead of having to constantly carry it around. Um, but yeah, and they all meet up. The girls all end up splitting up. They have that. They also had that little, was it the competition with like those robots. Um, Shoto and Bakugo ended up tying for second place here, since Shoto had to up his training, since he trained with Bakugo and his father for almost the full week. So he definitely had to up his training. So they're about even, but Deku outclasses everyone with his full drive at 15%. And he actually notices that it's better when he uses full drive with the full gauntlet when he practices with it later. He briefly tries it out for a little bit, like he throws a few kicks and punches. But yeah, they still end up going to the dance, and Deku is even more vehement to get involved than before because of the fact that his mother is also down there, and he's not gonna risk her. They end up going along as they do in canon. Throughout the film, they have to climb up the tower. Here, Deku just has straight up no problem with carrying Melissa, even if she does kind of protest to it. He makes it clear that as much as he appreciates the fact that she wants to be kind of independent, wants to carry her own weight, at the end of the day, she's practically the most vital component in this entire plan that they have. And most important of all, his mother's down there. He's not taking any risks. And she does also understand because her father is in danger as well, at least in her eyes. So she ends up accepting, and Uraraka does still get like a little bit of a jealousy stare, but he ends up showing his concern for her in the middle of the battle. He blitzes through a whole bunch of the robots using 30% at full drive with the full gauntlet, and is able to handle it pretty well because he's not recklessly letting his power loose like he does in full Cowl. Despite the fact that he's technically making more use of more power, like all the punches are much more powerful since he's able to regulate it so well on his own. It's causing less damage to the full gauntlet than it would have in canon. So he's able to clear out all the machines. Maybe Kaminari doesn't immediately go dumb dumb mode. Deku is able to briefly talk him out of it, and so he's gonna be saving up his energy for later, as Deku is able, or maybe Deku instead creates a massive shockwave. Um, he pulls off like a thunderclap that causes all of them to be knocked over, and come out of that shielded form that they have, making them vulnerable to Kaminari's attack, which he then does. So maybe he does still end up as dumb dumb mode, but eventually it ends up just about the same. Deku, the only difference is that against Wolfram he's able to hold his own much better. He's not going to be pinned to the wall like before. Although maybe he does let him monologue for a bit. Maybe he'll pick that up from like Gran Torino or All Might. They like tell him, if you ever get the opportunity, let the villain monologue. Like, or yeah, since he had that experience with Shigaraki at the mall, they like, you made a good decision. You allowed the villain to monologue. You always want to let him monologue to buy yourself as much time. So he ends up hearing about the plan, but he does still, as soon as he tries to leave with the professor, he breaks through and he ends up forcing Wolfram into a battle much earlier. They end up getting into a battle that he's able to make use of all the metal in the tower, um, but and Deku himself has to move the battle out of the control room so that Melissa can take control of the security. But they end up moving their fight onto the helipad area, and it's more like Wolfram gets thrown out onto the rooftop, and Deku is quick to retrieve the professor. Um, he like briefly admonishes him in a style similar to All Might, but and eventually All Might himself shows up. But during the commotion, with All Might showing up and them briefly having a conversation where he also admonishes David Shield. Wolfram was able to put that quirk enhancer onto his head, and he's able to power himself up. And the fight goes similarly to in canon, but Deku, since he's so much more powerful and is able to use a higher percent of One for All on his own, he's able to use full drive at 100% instead of having to go full cowl 100%. And him and All Might are able to make much easier work. Here, his wound doesn't get as aggravated. Deku is able to step in the second he recognizes that All Might is pinned and potentially in danger of having his wound aggravated. So, as like Wolfram is about to reach forward, although he does still get to make his comment about All for One as he's doing it, but he rushes forward and kicks Wolfram away, and the two of them work together to take him down. They hit him with that double Detroit smash, and they're able to save the day. Um, Inko ends up coming upon the scene, seeing her son, um, comforting Uraraka and being hugged by Melissa. She would have normally freaked out, but she's just happy that he's okay. He has little to no injuries, maybe like a little trail of blood, but it's nothing too dangerous. And yeah, the movie ends just about the same, but Melissa is. I'm gonna make one big change here. Melissa is actually going to be taken in by All Might, since she's kind of going to be parentless, since her father is going to be um, arrested. Even though she could technically pass as an adult, possibly she could probably go um, for like whatever it's called, full independence, legal independence. She allows herself to be taken in by Toshinori, and she actually moves to Japan. And maybe she transfers to UA over the course of the summer break. Um, and her little project to kind of get her mind off of the whole situation, her personal project, is going to be redeveloping the full gauntlets for Zuko to properly use. But this whole thing is going to be a surprise for everyone, and the entirety of the summer break is going to be a very big surprise for everyone when we get into the camp training in the next part. So that's where I'm going to end this part one of what if Deku developed full cowl early. His personality, he's definitely much more confident, much more sure of himself. He has two forms of using his power, full cowl and full drive. Um, he can handle them both at around 15%, and he's recently unlocked float. He's had about a week or two worth of practice with the form going into the summer break, or at least getting ready for it. And it's going to be what he's going to be focused on in terms of his training when it comes to the summer break. Um, he's building up more of his connection to One for All, even without completely knowing it or completely understanding what's happening. And Melissa is now going to be a part of the main cast going, or at least a part of the supporting cast going forward, and is going to be working on a special project for Deku to make use of. And yeah, that's where Bakugo's character development has been kicked into high gear, and him and Todoroki are each other's rivals, as well as the main rivals to Deku, the only ones who can actually put up any kind of fight, any kind of a fight towards him. And Uraraka and Deku's relationship is reaching something of a high point. They're getting closer, they're getting to know each other and trust one another. But Uraraka has a few questions for Deku that she's not sure about when exactly to ask or what exactly to question him about. And yeah, so next part, we're going to go into the training trip in the summer training camp. I'm going to end things here. This is Spider Fanboy signing out. Like, comment, subscribe. Hit that notification bell if you want more. And if you didn't like, go on ahead and if you have some problems, leave your criticisms and explain what you think I did wrong, anything that I may have missed. And if you're going to be a dick, just go on ahead and find something else to do with your time. Bye bye.